Good morning. I'm Erica Palmer, the Executive Director of the Independent Restaurant Coalition, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to a very important conversation about service charges. Since our inception, the IRC has been committed to making sure independent restaurants and bars have the tools they need to not only survive, but thrive. So while we're not suggesting that every restaurant switch its compensation structure, we are advocating for policymakers for fair treatment and an understanding of modern restaurant fee structures, including service charges to support workers. This conversation is particularly important today as we see the use of service charges under attack by the Federal Trade Commission and states like California. I'm delighted to be joined today by three fierce advocates for independent restaurants. Congressman Earl Blumenauer serves Oregon's 3rd District and is a tireless advocate for the entire food system from field to plate nationwide. Many in our coalition refer to the congressman as the patron saint of restaurants for his heroic work to support our industry during the pandemic. His courage and commitment have been unwavering, and today he joins us to talk about the Restaurant Service Charge Fairness Act that he introduced to Congress just a few weeks ago. We're also lucky to have Dan Jacobs, chef and co-owner of acclaimed Milwaukee restaurants, Esther Ev and Dan on the call today. Dan has woven advocacy into everything he does and has brilliantly represented independent restaurants in conversations with leaders, including President and Dr. Biden. Ron Su joins us today from Atlanta, where he is chef, partner, and culinary director of Lazy Betty and Humble Pie. Ron is a tireless advocate for equitable pay in the restaurant industry. He's spoken to Congress on the issue and frequently provides insight into the challenges restaurants face in good times and in bad through his contributions to publications like the New York Times. We've gathered a number of questions for the congressman and chefs, but we welcome yours as well. Please don't hesitate to pop them into the Q&A box, not the chat box, the Q&A box below, and we'll get to as many as we can today. Let's dive in. Congressman, time to come off mute so we can pepper you with a number of questions. First of all, what has inspired you to introduce the Restaurant Service Charge Tax Fairness Act, and what specific issues within the restaurant industry are you aiming to address with this legislation?
Well, thank you, Erica. Thank you for allowing me to join with you. I deeply appreciate you and the Independent Restaurants Coalition, what happened in terms of our recovery legislation during the pandemic with the rescue fund for 100,000 independent restaurants. And I do appreciate your voice to help people understand the role that the independent restaurants play in a vibrant, healthy community. I think you've done great work. You've raised the profile. It's been really delightful to work with you. What you're doing, your success is essential to have a thriving, healthy community. What we found is that, unfortunately, there's an unintended barrier in terms of being able to provide you the support you need to be able to innovate. The service charge is something that is appropriate for many restaurants, and we need to modernize the tax code to allow that to happen on the ground. The restaurant industry is changing, particularly as we come out of the pandemic. Independent establishments are looking for more ways to innovate in their compensation models. Now, we're seeing many neighborhood restaurants and bars transitioning from tips to a service charge. It has benefits for those that make sense in terms of making sure that employee pay is not tethered to the diner's experience. And there are potential problems dealing with servers subject to sexism, racism, harassment. A simple, visible service charge fee ensures that workers can be equitably and reliably compensated for their labor. But those who choose to adopt this service model deserve fair tax treatment. They're prioritizing equitable compensation for their employees and dealing with this effective, evolving, changing industry. My legislation would level the playing field and allow innovation on how independent restaurants choose to compensate their employees.
Thank you for that terrific explanation and for your continued commitment to our industry. We would truly be lost without you. Can you elaborate a little bit on the rationale behind the 25% cap on the exclusion of service charges from FICA taxes and how that percentage was determined?
Well, and it must be noted that this legislation didn't just come from my office. Similar to what we did with our rescue fund during the pandemic, which was the result of extensive interaction with those of you on the ground, what you need and how to express it. A 25% service charge seems to be a reasonable level, similar to a tip that small portion of the check goes directly to employees. It will prevent bad actors, and sadly, there are some in the industry who would game the system with low menu prices and high service charge. It'll also send a price signal to ensure that patrons are not overcharged. We think that this hits the sweet spot. It's something that is easy to administer and easy to explain, and we appreciate your assistance in helping us hit the right maximum level.
Getting a little further into the weeds of the Service Charge Tax Fairness Act, how will it ensure that service charges are distributed fairly among non-management employees, and what mechanisms will be in place to enforce this?
Well, it mandates that the service charge go directly to non-management employees as wages. Businesses will not be able to take the tax credit if the service charge doesn't go directly to the employees. We appreciate your help in making sure that it's going to be fairly distributed, and that's what this legislation does.
So, who do you think will oppose this bill, if anyone, and what feedback have you gotten so far?
Well, I think opposition, if it arises, is because of misunderstanding. I think anybody who dives into the dynamics that restaurants are facing on the ground, how this model has worked successfully for some who choose to incorporate it into their business model. And I think with your help, like what we're doing here on this call today, we can get the word out about what it means. Anybody who understands that it's voluntary, that it's been crafted in partnership with the industry, that it's got these protections built in, I don't think we're going to see significant opposition. One of the advantages I see of our working together on this project goes beyond uh, dealing with service charge equity. It's another example of why your independent restaurant coalition is so important as an independent voice for the unique benefits that you provide to our communities. Making sure your voice is heard and amplified is going to pay dividends all the way around, not just in terms of dealing with the service charge equity, but we have other issues in terms of supply chain, immigration, that we want to be able to work with you. And the more that we're able to deal with the Independent Restaurants Coalition as the voice for independent restaurants, I think it's not just going to help us on this surface charge, but it's going to help us be clear about other issues that you have, see that you are given the attention you need, and strengthen the voice of the industry itself. And I couldn't be more grateful that Ron and Dan are here with us, terrific representatives. And thank you, as always, Erica, for your assistance in helping us move these forward.
I have one last question for you that I can't believe I have to ask. Will someone take this bill up next year after you retire?
Well, I hope that we get it passed this year and take it off the table. I've got 6 months and about 6 days left in my term. And I'm in the process of working with my colleagues, handing off various projects that I've worked. Uh, you have developed a very significant following in Congress as a result of the work we did during the pandemic and the work you do day in and day out in your community. I am absolutely convinced that there will be no shortage of people who will take this banner up if we don't get it past this Congress. And I'm not willing to concede that in the next 6 months we can't do that.
I appreciate the enthusiasm and hope that we can actually get this done in the next 6 months. That would be remarkable and lovely. Thank you all for always listening to us and problem solving with us. We're really lucky to have you in our corner. And I'm going to turn the conversation to Dan for a second. We'll get the chef's input on how this will work. Dan, you have been very vocal about using service fees at SREV and pushing back on the Federal Trade Commission, labeling these fees as junk fees. Could you elaborate a little bit on this issue and the impact on the industry?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for letting thank you, Congressman, for taking up this important tool for us to be able to use. And I'm saying tool because as a restaurateur, we need every tool available to us to help compensate our teams while also making sure that our business stays profitable. All too often, people hear profitability and they think that owners are running off to buy a boat or some cool new car. But if a business isn't profitable, it's not going to keep its doors open, and that's not good for our teams either. Tipping, while it may work for your business, it doesn't work for everybody. And back in 2020, the summer of 2020, we opted to utilize a service charge model because what we saw was that our teams weren't being adequately compensated via tips. Um, you know, Prior to 2018, the Fair Labor Standard Act amendment made it illegal to share tips with kitchen employees. Even now, like our lawyers and my accountant will tell me or discourage me, from sharing the tips with the entire team because there isn't enough legal precedent to codify the procedure. So, the service charge really became like a popular workaround and made it so that we could pretty much equitably distribute the service charge across the board to all of our team members, not just the front of the house, but also the back of the house. I hate the hidden fees too. Like, I just rented an Airbnb in Lake Geneva, and when we went to check out, it was probably $600 more expensive without any sort of explanation. What we're doing as far as the service fee goes is not that. It is clear, and we are communicating these fees, not just to our staff members are communicating them to our guests, and we're making sure our guests fully understand it. It's on the website, it's on our menus, and we talk about it before and after. The way we're using our service fees is so that our staff can equitably make a living and make it so that this industry becomes something that they look at as a career. It also allows us to be able to pay paid time off, family leave. It allows us to be able to match health insurance and 3% on a 401k. Without the service fee, it doesn't work, and we're not a profitable business, and we can't do these things. So again, I just hope that everybody just understands that what this is. This is not a junk fee. This is how our teams basically make a living wage.
Thank you, Dan. Ron, turning to you for a moment, you've similarly been very outspoken about the challenges that face our industry, and you've embraced the service charge model. How do you currently handle the taxation of service charges in your restaurant, and what challenges have you encountered with the existing tax regulations?
Um, yeah, so I would say the way we deal with the challenges that the taxes on a service charge comes across already is really through our operations and how the service charge allows us to operate, right? I think as Dan kind of implied or alluded to is that we can alleviate some of the burden and pay disparity by giving some to the kitchen staff. But one of the challenges that at the end of the day, it is viewed as part of our income, so we do get taxed on it. And hopefully, because if you're implementing a service charge, you can have a little more flexibility. I believe in some states, if you're customer facing, you have to be customer facing like 90% of the time you're clocked in order to be part of a tip pool. Whereas if you're implementing the service charge, you don't have those kind of restrictions. So in theory, if you're a good operator and good manager, you can be a little more efficient. Well, we've also found that our staff just loves the service charge because it gives them they know that they're going to make a certain amount of money. And because of that, they have a little more stability. They can financially plan their lives a little bit better. Also, I think we have much less turnover because of that. So the business itself can spend less money in training. And I think it's just the back end of it, it just you get a lot more. So less money in training, less staff turnover, staff morale is higher. So even though we're paying more on taxes, it does allow us to be a better and more efficient restaurant.
Has the current tax situation caused a financial strain or administrative burden on your restaurant?
Yes, it has. It does take time to figure out how much I have to account for. I know my accountants have to figure out, take out whatever the percentage is of our sales and allocate that to our staff and so on. So there is some administrative burden on that. And I would say the biggest for us to service charge. So whenever we have new staff or new employees come on, there's a lot of explaining we have to do. And when we first opened the restaurant back in 2019, when it was a super novel idea, we actually got served with a lawsuit because there was some vagueness in the local laws about it. And we had to end up settling, even though the spirit of what we were doing was kosher. They just found a little loophole in that there was no language in local laws regarding how you deal with the service charge. So that actually cost us a few $1,000s to have to figure out. So yeah, there have been many challenges. It's not easy, but I would say that if we could get policy behind us, it would make the fight much easier. And if you can figure out how to implement it and integrate it into your operations, it may be hard at first, but if you can do it and maintain it, then it does it does bear a lot of fruit on the back end.
Thank you for the valuable insight on that and your personal experiences. It's incredibly helpful to hear. Dan, how would the proposed Service Charge Tax Fairness Act, particularly the exclusion of service charges from FICA taxes, impact your business operations and financial planning?
I mean, it greatly influences our financial planning. It would probably, I mean, the way we look at it, and I think me and Ron both have the same, issues with the sales tax. So it has to be quantified. The money being brought in as a service charge has to be quantified as something, and so it gets quantified as a sale. So it's taxed as a sale, and then we end up paying FICA taxes on top of that. The service charge would allow us to alleviate. I mean, the way I look at this, it allows me to alleviate that. It's almost like, was it last year? I think we spent just a bit over $70,000 in taxes on our service charge. That's a whole nother employee, like not just a line employee. That's a manager. So we could actually bring in, another staff member, another team member, and be able to, you know, just have an easier time at the restaurant, or make the restaurant more profitable. I mean, there's ways around this. Buy new equipment, there's so many things we could do with that money, instead of paying double taxes on it.
Ron, how do you ensure?
Eric, if I could just interject for a second. I think
Sure.
what Dan was saying about double taxation, I think it's clear that we need to use that as part of our communication strategy. It is being able to have it taxed once and taxed fairly, and make those operational decisions. And I think that's a very powerful argument that will be susceptible to friends in Congress that will need to support this. The notion of the double taxation resonates across the board philosophically. Republicans, Democrats, no matter who they're supporting, or if they're not supporting anybody, this is something that speaks to them. And it's one of the language elements that we need to adapt to be able to forcefully make these points.
Thank you for that. We will make sure that that is a message that everyone that's on the call today and our future messaging will include as we all reach out to our individual congresspeople and ask them to support this bill. Ron, turning to you again, how do you ensure the fair and equitable compensation for both front of house and back of house staff, and how might the Service Charge Tax Fairness Act support that balance?
Can I kind of piggyback on the
Yes,
previous
of course.
and I'll address this question? I also do want to say that, the service charge not only affects how much taxes we pay, but there's a lot of fees associated with running a restaurant that are all sales based. So if 20 or 25% of your sales are a service charge, you're raising the fees you have to pay. And if you have a lease condition where they're taking a percentage of rent based on your sales, then your rent goes up too. So it's not just taxes from the government, it's also just operationally it's really not a sale, right? It really functions as a payroll number. So it affects the business in so many ways. It's like a waterfall effect. But to address your most recent question about how can you ensure fair and equitable compensation? So the service charge that we've ran has had many iterations, and our most current iteration, and it's the longest iteration of any model we've ran, is we look at our sales and we break up certain categories, and we will skew this, we will weight the service charge to distribute amongst different parts of the restaurant. So for example, our service charge on our food sales, we give 20% of that to the back of the house. 80% of it goes to the service staff. Any food or any beverage sales, the service charge associated with that, 100% of that will go to the front of the house. So what that really allows you to do is incentivize your staff with whatever their primary responsibility, whatever they're really responsible for producing, right? So our cooks are going to be more incentivized to provide better food. The servers will be more incentivized to sell more, and it does actually come out to help the business in the end game. And because the staff feels vested in what they have control, it's more fair that way, right? Like the cooks don't sell any beverage, they don't pour any beverage. So why should they get a portion of that? So it really allows a business to get granular and modify it to how their business model operates. And so that's all we do. You really got to just take a look at your numbers and kind of skew it and weight it differently or modify it. And that's how we do it at Lazy Betty.
I want to thank you and the Congressman for guiding this conversation in a way that's most useful. The waterfall, the cascading effect of how service charges and taxation work is incredibly important for the conversation. I think one of the things that the IRC is committed to doing and needs the help of everyone on this call to do is to educate lawmakers on how restaurants work. Restaurant economics aren't cut and dry. They're not something everyone is used to. And so your personal experiences with them are really important when you're making those calls to Congress and sharing both your request for this legislation and the challenges that you all face. So thank you again, Ron, for adding that valuable context. Dan, I'm going to flip the script a little bit on you. Have you observed any changes in customer behavior or feedback regarding service charges versus traditional tipping? And how does that feedback impact your business strategy?
So we've been doing this for about 4 years now, and I think we were there was a handful of restaurants in Milwaukee that actually do this sort of a service model. So it's something we definitely have had to educate our guests on. We've definitely gotten pushback. I mean, I think people are just so used to the idea of, tipping that it becomes something that's, almost second nature. So when you see a 20% on there, they believe, I think most guests believe that, they're in charge of their own tipping amount. I like to say this takes the guesswork out of it, but also gives us an opportunity to really engage with our guests and train our staff to be able to engage in a way that I think is really useful and constructive. It's been difficult, and we've had some, definitely some bumps in the road, but I still think that what we're doing is in my opinion the right thing. And I think for the most part, our guests have come around to the idea of it. We just had the busiest month we've ever had at Dan ever. In our 7 years. So, or almost, it's almost 8 years. But and that's a testament to, I think, the team that we've been able to grow over there, and the understanding that we've kind of built with our guests. I mean, we see a lot of returning people. It's, most of our business is based on returning customers. As far as our team members go, I think we've created an atmosphere where people just, we end up with a really solid team that doesn't really leave, and they enjoy the consistent paycheck and where things are going and how the restaurant's moving. A friend of mine said this to me a long time ago, that when you move to this model, you're going to lose some really good people, but you're going to gain people that believe in what you're doing. And I think that's what we've been able to do. Now, again, this works for us. This doesn't work for everyone, and we're not forcing anybody to make any sort of change to a model like this. If the tip tax credit works for you, go for it. I just want another option. And to again piggyback on when Ron said I mean, there's so many things that go into our insurance is also covered by the amount of money we bring in. So that service charge being used as a taxable point of revenue that makes our insurance go up every year. So, again, I just think we as restaurateurs need every help we can get, every little tool we can get to make our business better and more sustainable. And this is just another tool in that arsenal.
Thanks, Dan. Ron, I'm going to pass the exact same question back to you. Have you observed any changes in customer behavior or feedback regarding service charges? And is this input affecting your business strategy?
Yeah, so so Lazy Betty opened with the service charge model, so there wasn't really no change in, having our customers or our guests go from a traditional tip model to a service charge model. But I can't compare to, the vast majority of the industry, which does operate off a tip model. And I would say the vast majority of our guests, they like having the service charge. There's this new word that goes around in this day and age called tip fatigue. And if you go buy, a box of chocolates at your CVS, you may get prompted to leave a tip at your CVS, right? Well, that's not part of the equation anymore with the service charge. I think what it does compel your team to offer a very high level of product, whether it's service, food, beverage, or all three. And you got to be a good operator and produce a good product if you're going to implement a service charge. And I think a lot of our guests do like the fact that, hey, even if there's something happens within the restaurant that's not necessarily the server's fault, whether it's like a leak in the ceiling and it drips onto the lady's jacket and that ruins their dinner. Well, the server should not be penalized, and they should not be worried if they can make rent because something that is out of their control. And some of our guests like that. They do know that it's very it's a security blanket for the staff, right? To know that they're going to get a certain amount of money. So overall, I think the guests like it. Obviously, you can't bat 1,000 and have every guest like it, but overall, once they get accustomed to it and they see it, I would say it's a positive thing.
Great to hear. We have a number of questions from our attendees tonight. Today, I'm in a time warp apparently. So we're going to dive into some of those. And the first one is for you, Congressman. As I'm sure you know, California has enacted a service charge ban, SB 478 in California. Our guests are wondering what the implications of this proposed legislation will be on things like the FTC proposed rule or the legislation in California. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think our legislation will help clarify the issues. I mean, part of what we need to do to take action on the federal government to be able to avoid the conflicts of competing issues. We've got issues in terms of some folks being caught up in the issue of junk fees. And this is an opportunity for us to provide legislative clarity from Congress about the intent of the service fee. And I think this is a step towards helping harmonize these other items and avoid conflict with overlapping objectives.
I do want to share with everyone listening today that the congressman has sent a letter regarding the FTC proposal, and the IRC has spoken out on the issue as well. If you're interested in finding that, do visit our website at independentrestaurantcoalition.com. Great language that you can use in your calls to your members of Congress. Congressman, again,
I will note that that was a bipartisan letter with my partner who helped us with the restaurant relief during the pandemic, and we hope that might get some people's attention.
Very great point. Again, another legislative question. How would this legislation impact restaurants who opt not to switch to a service charge model? Would it have any impact on them?
Short answer is no.
That's all the answer we need. Dan and Ron. We'll start with Dan and then we'll move to you, Ron. In what ways do you think the introduction of the Service Charge Tax Fairness Act could help mitigate some of the labor shortages faced by the industry? Or maybe I should ask, the use of service charges?
Well, I mean, again, I think the use of the service charges allows us to be able to pay a more equitable and sustainable, um, pay structure for our team. Basically, it creates an environment where, like, I believe the restaurant industry is always looked at as like a transient sort of environment for, our teams, whereas this, something like this act would allow us to be able to make this more of a sustainable career for someone, whereas it's like something that you could do for the rest of your life as opposed to something you're just doing to get through to the next thing. I love this industry. I want this industry to be the best it could possibly be, and I think legislation like this just allows it to do that.
Ron, your thoughts?
Could you repeat the question one more time?
Absolutely. The question is, how do you think that this legislation would help with the labor shortages that our industry has experienced, or would it?
I'll be honest. I don't know if it would help. I mean, I think it would help. I don't think it would cure by any means. I think what it does give an edge to restaurants that employ this model is that there's less turnover. The staff that works in a restaurant that utilizes the service charge would can have more financial security knowing that they're gonna make a certain amount of money. I think it also provides a better work environment for the staff. Yeah, I think so. I don't know if it'll bring a new labor pool into the pool, right? Or new people into the labor pool. But I do think for those that are in it, it'll make it a better industry to work in. But maybe that would, maybe the residual effect would that it would bring more people in and no people, people wouldn't leave as much. So yeah.
I mean, we heard, Dan, you mentioned that your staff has less turnover with the consistent knowing what their paychecks are going to be consistently and having that experience. The IRC is committed to making sure that we're professionalizing the restaurant industry. And again, while we're not saying everyone needs to move away from a tipping model, it seems like this is yet another tool in that toolkit. Do you agree?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, again, this allows us to be able to offer things like health insurance, paid time off, family leave, and 401k. These are the things that every major profession has. That restaurants historically have not had. I mean, I remember growing up in restaurants in the 90s and 2000s. The idea of health insurance for a line cook was laughable. Where legislation like this makes it possible for somebody in their 20s to actually have somewhat affordable healthcare.
It's very much, I think, in tune with what you're trying to do to professionalize and promote innovation. You shouldn't be a captive of the tax code or outdated thinking if you want to be able to treat these very sophisticated, skilled professionals. You know that. This is not just anybody off the street can do this. It involves training, hard work, and having a management that's flexible to work to try and provide these opportunities. And I commend you, those of you who are working to be able to do a better job of taking care of these skilled professionals. And I think together we can get the word out that this is another step in the evolution of your industry. And it's going to deal with retention and training and recruitment, and to simplify your operations. I mean, I am just stunned at what friends of mine in this industry, what I've seen you have to contend with in terms of the cross currents, the politics, the public dynamics, and on top of it, you shouldn't have to deal with a tax code that discourages innovation. And I'm hopeful that this is just another important step, a voluntary step that will help clarify and provide incentives and clarity for what you're doing.
Ron, go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to say, Congressman Blumenauer, innovation I think is a very good word, and I think you talked about it earlier is that it's not a fit for everyone. I would say that, if you could allow restaurants to, not cap it at 25%, because some restaurants may need a higher or higher number based on the type of product they offer. And I would also say that I don't think it's something, if a restaurant chooses to use it, you should not you should allow them to still take on the optional gratuity that a guest may want to leave. A lot of the employees that work in my restaurant, like, or in any other restaurant, they're not buying boats or, like, fancy cars. And I think fundamentally, we should not be introducing legislation that prevents our employees from making even more money if possible. Like, if they're providing amazing service and amazing food, and a guest feels compelled to leave an additional tip on top, why not allow that to happen? Um, so that's more for you, Congressman. If you I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but that would be just from my perspective is,
Right.
you know, yeah.
Well, complexity is not our friend, Ron. And we're going to have some, as you know, there are some challenges to try and explain it to guests and to employees. We've worked hard with your help in crafting this, that it's not a one size fits all. It's not mandatory. It provides this additional tool and makes sure that the tax code doesn't get in the way. I think what we've done is rational to start. We're perfectly willing to work with you on an ongoing basis if there's some adjustments or some refinements as we get more information. The key is to be able to get this across the finish line. It's not easy to make changes that impact the tax system, as you can well imagine. So I see this as a start based on our cooperation and our innovation. And then let's continue to be in touch in terms of what happens in the future. But I don't think it helps us to add additional complexity until we get it enacted.
Um, Keeping in that same vein, Congressman, could you address some of the specifics of the bill? We have a question that says, I'm curious about the need to spend 100% of the service charge on hourly employees in order to obtain that full tax benefit. Can this be via benefits such as paid time off or enhanced health care, or is it directly paid out in wages?
Help me, Erica. What did we decide? I thought it was direct.
I believe it's wages as well.
Yeah.
Um, Another question.
I mean, again, but we don't want to add additional complexity for people who don't want to do this or who are looking at excuses or frankly that nitpick. A lot of the work we've done with your industry on innovation has been subjected, even though these are things that we developed with you, have been subjected to legal challenges. There are some industry groups that are not exactly your friend. We don't want to give an opening for people who want to upset this apple cart.
So just to clarify a little bit on that, a service charge has to be used for wages, which is the tax code definition of wages. But if we're reducing the tax burden on folks using service charges, that should free up revenue to use for things, other programs for your employees. So
Right.
the purpose of this legislation is to reduce the tax burden to allow businesses more flexibility in how they are spending their revenue. We have another question that's sort of in the weeds of things. On average, my wait staff gets 26%. Would this program be a hindrance to them? And I think what we're saying here, and please help me clarify this, or we can also get back to this individual. We're not saying you can't use 26% for your service charge, but you would receive the benefit at a 25% level. Is that accurate?
Yes. At some point, we've got to establish the standard, reduce the byplay. What people do voluntarily is up to them, but in order to get the benefit in terms of the tax code, we need to conform to the ways that we work with the tax code, and clarity is going to be necessary to do that.
And would a restaurant be able to implement sort of a hybrid combination of service charges and tip with this new proposal? For instance, charging large parties a service charge, but then using a tipping model in their dining room with small parties.
Our legislation contemplates that you choose one or the other. The hybrid would result in losing the benefit. Again, this is something that we've done in conjunction with you to be able to move this through the legislative process. And the more complexity, the more excuses people have to not support this, works against what's going to be a little bit of an uphill. I don't think it should be an uphill challenge, but it's going to take time to get people's attention and get movement, and to enable greater diversity of this. It lose the clarity that we need to be able to conform it to the tax code. So people choose. They don't have to go one way or the other. That's up to them, but they need to choose. They can't develop their own hybrid model.
Thank you for that. I'm going to take you out of the hot seat for a minute and shift it back to Dan and Ron. One of the questions we're seeing in the Q&A is how we are defining management who would not be receiving service charges. I'm sure you've both experienced this in your businesses. Could you shed a little light on the subject?
So I keep it real simple. If you're on salary, you don't. I mean, this goes strictly to our line hourly employees.
Yeah, and that's what I do too.
Well, that was probably the most simple question you two have both answered today. Thank
Well,
you
I mean, it's so
I can make it more complicated if you want.
Yeah, the whole thing is so complicated that you want to make sure that, like, let's keep one thing simple.
I love that. Wouldn't it be nice if we could do that with everything? Another question is, will the service charge have to be accounted separately for the employee as tips were, or can it be included in the dollar amount the employee is paid?
Let me just interject here for a second.
Yes.
I had unfortunately been scheduled envisioning a slightly shorter conversation, so
Got it.
I need to hop off. But let me just express my appreciation for the continued partnership. I think this is really important to fully recover from COVID, to be able to strengthen the important role you play in the industry. Look forward to continuing to learn from and with you on this as we refine legislative proposals going forward. And I think this is a good start to get people's attention, and look forward to getting this across the finish line. And then we can think about what great things we want to do in the future when you'll have somebody else in my role that'll, I'm sure, do a better job for you.
No one can do a better job for us than you have, Congressman. Thank you for joining us this morning, and sorry to keep you longer than expected.
No.
Everyone else can stay on. We'll continue the conversation with the chefs for just a few more minutes, and Congressman, we'll be bothering you again soon.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see what else we've got in here. We've answered our management questions. Excuse me while I just take a quick scroll. I think we've answered the question around management pay would not be paid through service charges. A lot of folks are asking, why don't restaurants just pay their employees more? Dan, I'm going to start with you. Can you explain why it's not that simple? Can you also explain why the FTPC proposal of put all the prices into your menu rather than identifying them as service charges is just ludicrous? And then Ron, we'll come to you with the same question after.
So I think, it's funny. The service charge is actually way more in your face and less hidden than if I was to raise all our prices and account for it that way. Like, I feel like that's more of a way that can be more used as a way to hide, how and, we're using the money. Service charge 100% goes to the staff. Like, there's nowhere else it goes. It goes directly to the staff. It couldn't be it's the furthest thing from hidden. It's right in your face. It's on the menu. It's on the website. We talk about it before, we talk about it after the meal. So the idea that it being a hidden fee is crazy. If I raise my prices, it's more likely it's hidden fee, but I'm also not going to be able to compete with the restaurant down the street. You know, if our cheeseburger is going to be $26 because that's what it needs to be in order for us to be able to utilize to pay our staff the way we're paying it, the restaurant down the street that's charging 13, where are you going to go? You're going to go to the place that charges $13 for the cheeseburger, no matter how good my cheeseburger is. You know, we become a special occasion restaurant, which is something I think those of us who have owned restaurants, you never really want to become that place. You want to be a place that people go to often. I think, you know, leaving the service charge there, it's right there in the open.
Ron, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we've done a lot of things in our restaurant similar to how Dan at his spot has done it. It's on our website, it's on our reservation page. It's reiterated when guests sit down at the dinner and when we drop the bill. Um, you know, so it's not hidden. Now the way we calculate it and split it up, I wouldn't say it's not hidden, or you know, we may choose to divide the sales or the service charge amongst different members of the team differently, but at the end of the day, it does go back to the staff. You know, we do use the service charge to pay for things like health insurance and other employee benefits and things like that. But at the end of the day, it is very upfront on all our customer facing assets.
Thank you for that. There is a question in the chat that I'm going to address really quickly that asks how the accounting around service charges and versus tips would be included. Would you have to account for the service charge, or would it be included in the dollar amount the employee is paid? Really simple answer right now is you would certainly have to demonstrate that your service charges were going to your employees. The specifics, as is the case with most legislation, haven't been worked out yet. We're working on it. We would welcome your input on how to best guide this process. We'll be learning from folks like Ron and Dan who have this process in place, and we appreciate your input, but we can't offer you a very specific guideline on exactly what your accounting would need to look like at this point. Ron.
So Erica, yeah, so you know, one thing that I've done in regards to service charge that may shed some light on your problem here, is that we have found that if you include the service charge in the price, so let's say if your service charge is $10 and you charge $20 for a burger, you charge 22 for it and just say it's included, and that is much more receptive. People are much more receptive to that than seeing a 10% service charge added as like a line item onto the receipt. And so, you know, I don't know if that affects the policy at all, but it definitely has it's a perception kind of an optics kind of type thing. So
I think this question was specifically about your accounting practices and how it's showing up on a paycheck.
Oh, okay, gotcha. I thought it.
Yeah, could you share more on how you are identifying that with your team?
Yeah, I mean, we on the paycheck, it's written as part of the tips and not service charge. And that's just a matter of our payroll company doesn't allow us to change the actual like words on their paycheck. But we're very transparent. We're like, guys, this is where it's showing up on your paycheck.
Terrific. Thank you for that. Dan, anything you want to add to that? No. Okay. It looks like we have made it through all of the questions in the chat. So for more information about this and all of the other policy initiatives that the Independent Restaurant Coalition is working on, please visit our website at independentrestaurantcoalition.com or find us on Instagram. You'll see in our link tree on Instagram lots of easy ways to, in one click, contact your congressperson. And we need your support. We need your voice in this conversation. Advocacy is something that needs to be integrated into our daily activities. I know it sounds like a chore, but Dan and Ron can share with you that when you do it every day, it becomes a habit. And it is incredibly impactful, even making one phone call or using your voice in your community to shed light on the challenges and the solutions that independent restaurants and bars face. Thank you all for joining us today. Special thank you to Dan and Ron for sharing your incredible insight into this challenge. And let's all get out there and make those phone calls and see if we can get this the Restaurant Service Charge Tax Fairness Act passed before my dear friend Congressman Blumenauer retires in 6 months. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.